And we are in the book of Nehemiah, and today we're going to be reading a little bit of Nehemiah 5, chapter 5, and chapter 6. Okay, so hope is the worst thing is never, ever the last thing. And how do we know that? How do we know that? Because Jesus was resurrected. All right. Now I have always a second placard, and today my second placard is I can share hope because God gives me hope. And if you're unmuted, you can say it with me. I can share hope because God gives me hope. All right. So while Nehemiah and all of his builders were putting the walls around Jerusalem back together, there continued to be trouble. Can you believe that? People who had come back to live in Jerusalem were complaining that they didn't actually have enough food or money because they had to give too much of it to their landowners. So Nehemiah and some of the others, some of his brothers, were having to lend the people food and money. So Nehemiah, got my book here, our Bible, Nehemiah called the landowners together and he said, so I continued, said Nehemiah, what you are doing, so he's talking to the landowners, what you are doing isn't good. Why don't you walk in the fear of our God? This will prevent the taunts of the nations that are our enemies. I myself, along with my family and my servants, am lending them money and grain. But let's stop charging this interest. Give it back to them right now. Return their fields and their vineyards and their olive orchards and their houses. And give back the interest on money, grain, wine, and oil that you are charging them. And the landowners replied, we'll return everything and we won't charge anything else. We'll do what you have asked. All right. So Nehemiah took care of that problem, right? But, of course, there was another one. Remember, some people didn't want Nehemiah to build the wall at all? So they made trouble for him. Do you remember that? And some of them even made up stories about him. So I'm going to read a little bit here. Let me see. 6 to 9. Alrighty, it is reported among the nations and confirmed by Geshem that you and the Jews intend to rebel. This is why you are rebuilding the wall. According to these reports, you intend to become their king. You have also appointed prophets to make this announcement about you in Jerusalem. There is a king in Judah. Now the king will hear of these reports. So come, let's talk together. That you say this has happened. You are simply inventing this. So he says, so let's talk together. So Nehemiah sends him this reply. He says, nothing that you say has happened. You are simply inventing this. All of them were trying to make us afraid, saying, they will be discouraged and the work won't get finished. But now God strengthened me. So Nehemiah thought that, he knew that stories had been made up. So let's see, there's another one. Let me see, 10 to 13. All right. So Nehemiah says, later I went to see Shemaiah, Delia's son, and Mehetabel's grandson, who was confined to his house, and he said, let's meet together in God's house, inside the temple itself. Let's shut the doors of the temple, for they are coming to kill you. They are coming to kill you tonight. But Nehemiah replied, should someone like me run away? Who like me would go into the temple to save his life? I won't go in. Then, Nehemiah says, I realized that God hadn't sent him at all, but that he spoke this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He was hired to frighten me and to make me sin by acting in this way. Then they could give me, Nehemiah says, a bad name and discredit him. Do you remember Sanballat, Tobiah, and Geshem? They were the ones who did not want the building of the wall in Jerusalem. All right. So they thought that if they made stories up about Nehemiah, that he would stop doing the work that God had asked him to do. But Nehemiah might be afraid. They thought that Nehemiah might be afraid of what people would think he was doing, or think that he was doing something bad. Or they would try to trick him, as we read, right, into doing something that Nehemiah knew he would never do. And they were trying to scare him away from doing God's work. So let me read 6:12. Again, then I realized that God hadn't sent them at all, but that he spoke this prophecy against me because Tobiah and Sanballat had hired him. He was hired to frighten me and to make me think that I would do this thing. So what does he know? What does Nehemiah know? Hope is the worst thing is never the last thing. All right. So I'm going to read you Nehemiah 6:15. Here it is. So here's the good news. Nehemiah trusted God. Inside of himself, he could hear the right thing to do. And so he kept building the wall. And he could see that there were people who were trying to play tricks on him. But God was with him. So the wall was finished on the 25th day of the month of Elul. It took 52 days. And when all of the enemies heard about this, all of the nations around us were afraid, and their confidence was greatly shaken. And why would that happen? Why would their confidence be greatly shaken? Because they knew that God was on Nehemiah's side, on the side of the Jews. So Nehemiah believed in God and listened to him, and he never was fooled by the people who wanted him to stop doing his good work. Nehemiah learned, I can share hope because God gives me hope. And what did we learn? What have we learned? Because this is the end of this series with Nehemiah, because the wall is built. We learned hope is the worst thing is never the last thing. And how do we know that? We know that because Jesus died and came to life again from the cross, right? He left the empty tomb. Hallelujah! Hallelujah. And now I'm going to read